The woman on the stone hill. They buried her husband on a Tuesday. By Friday, his brother had counted the coins. $7, 2 flour sacks, a splitting maul with a worn handle. That was what Magnus Brandt decided his sister-in-law was owed for 11 years of marriage to a man now lying under 6 feet of Montana clay. Ingrid Brandt did not argue. She was 41 years old. She had buried 2 children before this husband. She had crossed an ocean at 23, with nothing but her father's voice in her head, telling her how to read the bend of a green willow branch, how to feel the weight of coming snow in the back of her throat. She had survived 11 Montana winters with hands that knew exactly what cold could do to a body left alone. The almanac in the Helena General Store said this winter would be the worst in a decade. She believed it. She had felt the elk move down from the high country a full month early. She had watched the asters along Prickly Pear Creek go black overnight. 47 days. That was what she had before the first killing freeze. No roof, no walls, no name on any deed in any office in this territory. Just $7, and a hillside 2 miles south of town that nobody else had thought to look at yet. She picked up the maul. She started walking. The funeral. The rain that morning was thin. The kind of rain that doesn't commit. The kind that makes a graveside feel even colder than the wind alone would have managed. Ingrid stood at the foot of the grave with her hands folded in front of her and her eyes dry. She had cried for 3 nights straight when Conrad first stopped breathing. She had cried until her face felt like it belonged to somebody else. By the morning of the funeral, there was nothing left in her to spend. Her brother-in-law, Magnus, stood across from her. He held his hat against his chest. He did not look at her once during the entire service. She noticed that. She noticed everything. The Reverend Edmund Crane spoke the words from the book he always carried. His voice was steady. His delivery was precise. Crane was a man who took his role seriously, and Ingrid respected that even when she did not particularly like him. He read about valleys and shadows. He read about the Lord being close to the brokenhearted. The words moved through the small gathering and settled somewhere just above the surface of the wet earth, the way certain prayers do when they are correctly spoken, but not particularly believed. 11 people had come. Ingrid counted them, out of habit, out of the lifelong instinct of a woman who counts everything because counting is the only way she has ever known to keep the world from getting too large. 11 mourners for a man who had laughed louder than any of them, who had carried her across the threshold of their cabin on a winter night in 1865 and told her in his clumsy German, still half tangled with English, that she was the best decision he had ever made. She did not throw dirt onto the coffin. She had read once somewhere that throwing dirt was a custom from another country. She did not remember which. She only knew it did not feel like hers. She turned to walk back to the cabin. Magnus walked beside her. He waited until they were past the line of cottonwoods before he spoke. "You'll need to be out by Friday." Ingrid did not stop walking. She did not turn her head. "Friday," she repeated. "Sundown." 3 days. He had given her 3 days to leave the home she had lived in for 11 years. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She had already understood in the first hours after Conrad's death that the cabin and everything in it would revert to his brother by the logic of the frontier, which was not always the logic of courts, but was always the logic of men with deeds and neighbors willing to back them up. What she said instead was, "And what is mine?" It was not a question. Magnus cleared his throat. He had clearly prepared this part. $7, 2 flour sacks, the mall, the boots you stand in, the dress you wear, the coat. Anything you can carry that was clearly his to give you while he lived. She nodded once. Conrad's pocket watch. That was his. He gave it to me the night before he died. Magnus did not answer for a long moment. Then he said, "All right, the watch, and his folding knife, the one with the cracked handle. That belonged to your father." "Yes." "Then take it. It was never his to begin with." She kept walking. The cabin came into view through the trees. The same cabin she had scrubbed and chinked and decorated and made into a home. The same cabin where she had nursed Conrad through the cough that took him. The same cabin that by Friday at sundown would no longer have her name in it. She walked through the door. She did not cry. She began instead to count. 3 days, 6 hours of light per day this time of year. Maybe less with the cloud cover. 18 hours total to plan a life. 47 days by her best estimate of the air before the first killing freeze. Then a month of declining temperatures. Then deep cold. Then the worst winter in a decade. The almanac had said so. The leaving. By Friday morning, Ingrid Brandt had packed 2 flour sacks. The first held a wool dress, a second pair of boots with the left sole separating at the toe, a tin cup, her father's folding knife with the cracked handle, a small jar of rendered fat she had put up herself in August. The second held Conrad's pocket watch, a folded wool blanket, a tin of matches, a small leather-wrapped bundle that contained a needle, a spool of thread, and a curl of waxed string. That was it. That was 11 years. She stood in the middle of the cabin and looked around once. She did not let herself linger. Lingering was a luxury for women who had time. She picked up her father's splitting maul from where it leaned beside the stove. She walked out the door at 2 in the afternoon. 6 hours of light remaining. Magnus did not say goodbye. The Reverend's offer. Crane was waiting for her at the bottom of the path. She had not expected him. He stood with his hat in his hands and his thin shoulders held in the precise posture of a man who had rehearsed his approach. Crane was 46 years old. He had a face that had been shaped more by conviction than by weather. "Mrs. Brandt." "Reverend, the congregation has discussed your situation." She waited. "We would like to offer you accommodation in the church basement through the winter in exchange for domestic work, cleaning, laundering, meal preparation for church functions." "How many hours per week, Reverend?" He paused. He had hoped perhaps that she would weep with gratitude before the numbers came up. 35, possibly 40 depending on the season. She set down the flour sacks, carefully, the way a woman sets down something she might need to pick up again in a hurry. "I appreciate the congregation's concern," she said. Her voice carried the German inflection that 23 years in Montana had softened but never quite erased. but I am 41 years old. I buried a husband 11 days ago and 2 children before him. I have worked every day since I was 7 years old. I have no interest in becoming a servant in a church basement. Crane's expression tightened. Pride is a sin, Mrs. Brandt. So is wasting what you have been given. The words came out even, without heat, which gave them more weight than anger would have. And what have you been given exactly? 2 hands and a mind that works. She picked up the flour sacks. She walked past him. He called after her. When this fails, the offer may not remain available. She did not turn around. Then, I had better not fail. The hillside. She walked south. She did not walk toward town. She did not walk toward the boarding house on Bridge Street, which she had already calculated would not extend credit to a widow. Regardless of references, she walked south along Prickly Pear Creek into the canyon she had walked dozens of times during the 11 years she had been Conrad Brandt's wife. She walked past the lumber company's staging area where 4 men paused their work to watch her go. She felt their eyes. She did not look up. She walked until the canyon narrowed, until the north-facing slope on the east side turned steep enough that she could calculate from the angle alone how snow would accumulate there in January. Deep, piled against the rock face, packed hard by the prevailing northwest wind, which meant the rock face itself would be largely protected from direct loading, which meant any structure built against it low enough to stay below the primary wind channel would shed snow by diversion rather than by resistance. She found the alcove exactly where she remembered it. 2 years prior, she had walked this stretch with Conrad. He had been laughing about something. She had stopped to look at the rock slide cavity in the hillside, and he had asked her what she was looking at. She had said, nothing, a thought. She had filed the location in her head the way her father had taught her to file the location of every cooperative piece of land she had ever seen. A rock slide old enough that lichen had colonized most of the exposed surfaces. A natural hollow in the hillside. Semicircular, roughly 11 feet across at the opening, cutting back into the slope perhaps 6 feet at its deepest point. The exposed rock face curving inward, with a geometry that was, if not deliberate, at least cooperative. She set down the flour sacks. She put her palm flat against the back wall. She felt nothing move. The 4 men from the lumber company were still watching her from downstream. She could feel their attention without turning to look. She knew what they were seeing. A middle-aged German widow crouching in a rock slide cavity, touching the walls, doing the arithmetic of some project they could not yet identify. She did not perform for them. She did not perform against them. She measured the alcove with her feet, walking the perimeter twice. She stood at the exact center of the mouth and looked out at the angle of the hillside above. She traced the trajectory of the wind path. She calculated the arc of the creek, the direction of the prevailing northwesterly. If she could close the front of this alcove, if she could close it with something curved, something low enough to fall below the wind channel, something integrated enough with the hillside that snow would simply redirect around it, then the hillside itself became the back wall, the floor, the insulation. The rock would absorb and hold heat from any fire she built inside. The elevation kept her above the floodline. The orientation meant afternoon sun would warm the south face during the months it mattered. The alcove's natural depth gave her 6 feet of storage before she even added a single stick of structure. She was not building with the land. She was building from it. The first night she slept, that first night under a tarp she had borrowed from a man named Jasper Holloway. Holloway ran a small freight operation near the creek. He had known Conrad slightly. When Ingrid had walked up to him in the late afternoon and asked to borrow a tarp and a bucksaw until sundown the next day, he had looked at her for a long moment, and then he had simply nodded and brought both items out from under the seat of his wagon. He had not asked what she was building. He had said, "Bring them back when you're done with them." She had said, "I will." That was the entire conversation. The temperature dropped to 38 degrees that night. She slept in her coat, in both pairs of stockings, with the splitting maul beside her right hand. She did not sleep deeply. Around midnight, she heard footsteps on the gravel, light footsteps, the footsteps of someone old or unwell or moving carefully so as not to be heard. Ingrid sat up. She did not call out. A figure emerged from the line of cottonwoods, a small figure, wrapped in a dark shawl, carrying a lantern that had been turned down so low it produced almost no light. "Mrs. Brandt." A woman's voice, thin, careful. "Yes." The figure came closer, stopped at the edge of the tarp. The lantern came up slightly. It was a face Ingrid recognized, an old face. A face she had seen in the back pew of the church on Sundays for years without ever knowing the name attached to it. "My name is Hannah Pruitt. May I sit?" Ingrid moved aside. Hannah Pruitt sat on the edge of the tarp with the slow, careful motion of a woman whose joints had been arguing with her for 2 decades. She set the lantern between them. The light was the color of old butter. She did not speak for a moment. Then she said, "I heard the Reverend made you an offer." "How did you hear that already?" "This is a small town." "Yes." "Mrs. Brandt, I lived in that basement for 3 winters." Ingrid turned her head. Hannah Pruitt was looking at the lantern flame. She did not look at Ingrid, the way a person does not look at someone when the words they are about to say will be easier if delivered into the light instead of into a face. "My husband died in 1869. Pneumonia. We had no children. I had no family in the territory. The Reverend offered me what he offered you. I took it. I was 61 years old. I did not believe I had any other choice." The lantern flickered. "The first winter it was bearable. The second winter I noticed that people stopped using my name. They called me the woman who helps at the church. Not Mrs. Pruitt, not Hannah, just the woman. And by the third winter I noticed something worse." "What?" Ingrid asked. Quietly, I had stopped using it too, in my own head. I would lie on the cot at night, and I would try to remember my own name, and it would take me a moment. A real moment. Like reaching for something on a shelf I had not used in a long time. Ingrid did not say anything. They take it away from you slowly, not with cruelty, with kindness. They are kind, Mrs. Brandt. The Reverend is kind. The women are kind. They feed you. They give you a roof. They speak to you in soft voices. And every single day in every small interaction, they remind you that you are there, because you are not capable of being anywhere else. After 3 winters of that, a woman is not who she was when she walked through the basement door. How did you leave? My sister wrote from Iowa. Her husband had died. She needed help with her grandchildren. I had a reason to go. If she had not written, I do not know what would have happened to me. You came back to Helena. 2 years later, yes, after my sister passed. I have a small room above the cobbler's shop on 3rd Street. I do mending. I am, she paused, looking for the word. I am myself again. Mostly. But it took years. Ingrid was very still. Hannah Pruitt finally looked up at her. Her eyes were brown and tired and entirely clear. I came tonight because I heard you said no. And I wanted you to know that you were right to say no. And I wanted you to know that there have been others before you. And they will not tell you the things I am telling you, because they are still in that basement, and they cannot see clearly enough to tell you anything. Ingrid reached for Hannah's hand without thinking about it. The old woman's hand was cold. The 2 women sat together for a long time without speaking. The lantern burned lower. Finally, Hannah said, "What are you building?" "A woodshed. First, then a place to sleep. Here against the rock." "Yes." "Why?" "Because the rock will hold heat. Because the hillside will redirect snow. Because I have $7.46, and the conventional methods will not work." Hannah Pruitt looked at the alcove. She looked at Ingrid. She nodded once. Then she said, "I have $11, saved over 4 years. I would like to give you 4 of it." "No." "Mrs. Brandt." "No, Hannah, I will not take it. I will need help, and I will accept help, but not money. Not from you." "Then what?" Ingrid thought. "Come and sit with me sometimes, in the evenings, while I work. Tell me what you saw in those 3 winters. Tell me everything. I want to remember it. I want to make sure no other woman in this town has to walk into that basement without knowing what you know." Hannah Pruitt's mouth trembled. It was the only time she had moved in such a way during the entire conversation. "All right. I will come." She stood up, slowly, carefully. Before she walked away, she said one more thing. "Mrs. Brandt, the Reverend will not forgive you for refusing him. Not because he is a cruel man. He is not cruel. But because every woman who refuses him reminds him of something. I do not know what. I only know that he carries it, and he will carry it harder now." Ingrid said, "I know. Be careful." "I will." Hannah walked back into the cottonwoods. The lantern light retreated through the trees and disappeared. Ingrid lay back down under the tarp. The wind moved through the canyon. The creek talked to itself in the darkness. She did not sleep until almost dawn. The framework. The next morning, she began. She walked a 1/4 mile downstream and selected 12 saplings from the cottonwood and willow growing thick along the creek bottom. She chose them by feel, by the diameter of her own wrist, by the suppleness of the branch when she bent it experimentally between her hands. Cottonwood for half, willow for half. Each one approximately 14 feet in length. She cut them with the buck saw she had borrowed from Holloway. She dragged them to the alcove in 2 trips. She arranged them on the ground in order of flexibility. She stood for a moment, looking at them laid out like the ribs of something enormous and not yet assembled. Then she drove 2 stakes into the creek soil at the exact lip of the alcove opening, 11 feet apart, using the back of the splitting maul. Her father had taught her this when she was 9 years old, in the Black Forest, before she had ever seen a horse, before she had ever seen the ocean, before she had even known there was such a place as Montana waiting on the other side of her childhood. Her father, Heinrich Müller, a charcoal burner, a man who had built temporary shelters from green wood for 40 years before his daughter was born, who had told her repeatedly that the limitations of a material were only limitations if you insisted on using it wrong. Green wood bent without breaking. Seasoned wood held its shape. If you bent green wood into the shape you wanted and you held it until it seasoned, it became that shape, permanently, as though it had always intended to grow that way. She buried the first sapling 18 inches deep on the left side. She tamped the earth around it until it held without wobbling. Then she bent it, slowly, with the weight of her body, rather than the strength of her arms, letting gravity and time do the work that force would damage, into a smooth arc overhead, and anchored the other end in a corresponding hole on the right side. The result was a semicircle of living wood spanning the full width of the alcove mouth, its apex at roughly 7 feet, curving with a clean geometry that owed nothing to milled lumber and everything to the fact that a living tree bent slowly and held long enough, remembered the shape it was given. She stood under the arch and looked up. She thought of her father, 21 years dead. She did this 11 more times. By late afternoon, the framework looked like the entrance to a tunnel, or the skeleton of some creature from a different age. Curved bones arranged with more intention than accident, catching the last light at angles that made the men downstream stop their work and look. The engineer. A man came up around 2 in the afternoon. He stopped at a respectful distance. He studied the framework without speaking for nearly a full minute. He was a tall man, thin, with the stiff right knee of someone who had been hurt years ago and had never fully healed. He wore the careful, slightly rumpled clothing of a person who had once been an engineer and was now something else. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, genuinely curious, not dismissive. "That is an interesting notion you are building, Mrs. Brandt. It is a woodshed, Mr. Whitlock. Samuel Whitlock. Mr. Whitlock. I did some surveying for the Northern Pacific before a mining claim near Marysville pulled me sideways from my career." "I see." He looked at the framework, at the green saplings already beginning to set in their curved positions. "Cottonwood and willow. Won't hold snow load. First real storm will flatten this." She did not stop adjusting the angle of the 9th arch. "Snow is going to hit the hillside 20 feet above this spot and redirect. I am not building tall enough to catch it." He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the angle of the slope above the alcove. He traced the path she had described with his eyes. She watched him run the geometry in his head, the way engineers run geometry, following the load path, checking for the failure point, finding where the calculation either held or did not. Something shifted in his expression. Not agreement. Not yet. But the recalibration of a man who had realized the question was more complicated than he had initially assessed. He put his hat back on. He walked away. Before he rounded the stand of cottonwood that would take him out of her sight line, he stopped. He looked back at the framework once more. She noted it. She noted everything. She worked until the light was entirely gone. She wove the first willow shoots through the vertical arches in long horizontal passes. Over, under, over, under. Each one pulled tight before the next was started, basket weaving at architectural scale. Her fingers found the rhythm her hands had learned as a child, the same rhythm her grandmother had used making storage containers that were still in use when Ingrid had left Germany at 23. By dusk, she had 3 feet of woven lattice wall curving smoothly from the rock face on the left side, closing the alcove's opening with something that already had structural integrity, not the rigidity of a board wall, the tensile strength of interlocked living material, the kind of strength that gives rather than breaks, that recovers rather than fails. The watch. She returned Holloway's bucksaw before sundown as promised. He was sitting on the back of his wagon when she walked up, eating bread and cheese. He did not stop eating. It working. So far. Need anything else? Tomorrow, if you can spare an hour, I need someone to hold a sapling while I anchor the far side. 12th one is the worst. Springs back hard if you're alone. He chewed. He nodded. 6 in the morning. 5:30. Light is better. 5:30 then. She walked back to the alcove in the falling dark. She slept under the tarp again. The temperature dropped to 34 degrees. In the middle of the night, she woke up. She sat up under the tarp. She reached into the second flour sack. She pulled out Conrad's pocket watch. She held it in both hands, pressed it briefly to her cheek. The metal was very cold. The faint smell of him was still in the leather of the chain. She did not know how. She had not used his pomade or his soap on it. But there it was. The smell of his collar. The smell of his shoulder. The smell that had filled the cabin every morning for 11 years and would now never fill any room she lived in again. She held the watch. She felt the small unevenness under the lid. The lid did not quite close flat. There was a slight cushion to it, as though something were inside between the mechanism and the outer case. She had noticed this once before, months ago, when Conrad had still been alive, and she had been holding the watch idly sitting beside him on the porch. She had said, "Conrad, your watch lid is loose." He had said, "Is it?" He had not looked up from his book. She had filed it in her head, the way she filed everything. She had never opened it. Now, in the dark, under a tarp with the wind moving through the cottonwoods and her dead husband 11 days in the ground, she ran her thumb along the lid. Whatever was inside was inside. She did not open it. Not tonight. Tonight she still had 11 arches to weave. She put the watch back in the sack. She lay down. She closed her eyes. She slept until 5. The mason. By the 3rd day, the framework was complete. 12 arches, 16 inches apart, each one seated a little deeper into the ground as the line moved back toward the rock face, the outermost arch standing free. the innermost nearly touching the stone. Holloway had come at 5:30 as promised. He had held the 12th sapling without speaking while she anchored both ends. When the work was done, he had nodded at her, picked up his hat, and gone back to his wagon. She had not paid him. He had not asked. By the end of the third day, 2 more men had stopped to watch. A miner from the operation above the canyon. 30, maybe. He asked if she was building a fish trap. She told him briefly and without elaboration that she was building a woodshed. He looked at the structure from multiple angles and left without arriving at any visible conclusion. The second man was older, heavily built, with the hands of a person who had been in physical conversation with stone and wood for 30 years. He stood at the edge of the work area and watched her weave for nearly 5 minutes without speaking. His arms were crossed. His expression was focused in the particular way of a man cataloging details rather than forming an opinion. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the flatness of professional observation. Wattle and daub. Not quite a question. Yes, Ingrid said, when the clay is mixed. What are you mixing into the clay? Dried grass and horse manure from the stable on the East Road. He nodded once, slowly. That is why it will not crack when it freezes. The fiber holds the matrix together when the moisture expands. She turned to look at him. He walked the perimeter of the structure. He paused at the back where the arches met the rock face. He touched the stone with his fingertips. Good thermal mass at the back. Rock will hold heat for 8 to 10 hours after a fire goes out in the front area. He looked at the pieces of overlapping bark she had begun stacking nearby. Those bark shingles. Lay them down slope. Always down slope. That is where water comes in. People shingle them wrong every time. I know how to shingle them, mister. Bishop. Thomas Bishop. Mr. Bishop. He looked at her. Directly. For the first time. This is going to work. She pulled the next willow shoot through its sequence. I know. He left without ceremony. She heard 2 days later that he had been telling someone in the lumberyard that the German widow on the creek was doing something worth watching. The word moved through the small professional community of men who built things for a living, the way such words moved in those communities. Not quickly, but with a specificity that made it land differently than gossip. The second visit, on the evening of the 4th day, Hannah Pruitt came back. She brought a small basket. Inside were 3 boiled potatoes still warm wrapped in a clean cloth, and a second cloth wrapped around 4 slices of dark bread. She set the basket on the flat rock Ingrid had been using as a work surface. I thought you might not be eating. Ingrid looked at the basket. She had not in fact been eating. Thank you, Hannah. Eat now, while I am here, so I can see that you eat. That is not necessary. It is necessary. Sit down, Mrs. Brandt. Ingrid sat. She ate one of the potatoes. Slowly. The salt and the warmth hit her body, the way salt and warmth hit a body that has been pushing too hard for too long. She felt briefly dizzy. Hannah watched her. Mrs. Brandt, may I ask you something? Yes. Why are you doing this truly? Why this instead of the boarding house or moving on to another town? Or writing to people in Germany who might still... I have no people left in Germany. None My father died when I was 20. My mother the year I left. I had a brother. He died in the War of 70. I have a cousin somewhere in Bavaria who has not written since 1872, and probably does not remember my name. Hannah was quiet. And in Helena, Conrad was the family I had. He was the only family I had for 11 years. And the other towns, Ingrid set down the potato. Hannah, I am 41 years old. I have been a wife in this town. I have been a neighbor in this town. I have been on certain occasions a midwife in this town. I have given to people here more than I have received. If I leave for another town, I become a stranger again. A widow stranger. With $7. I have lived as a stranger before. I do not have the strength to do it twice in one lifetime. Hannah nodded. And the basement. Ingrid looked at her. The basement is where Conrad's wife disappears. Hannah did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, yes. Ingrid finished the potato. She ate one of the slices of bread. The wind picked up. The first of the evening cold was beginning to settle into the canyon. The willow framework caught the late light at its edges and threw long, curved shadows across the alcove floor. Hannah looked at the structure. It is beautiful, Mrs. Brandt. It is not finished. It is beautiful anyway. Ingrid did not answer. She sat with the old woman in the fallen dark, eating bread while the creek talked to itself and the wind moved through the cottonwoods and the framework of green wood held its curve against the hillside, learning the shape it would hold for the next 27 years. The first snow. That night after Hannah had walked back to her room above the cobbler shop, Ingrid lay on her back under the tarp and looked up at the underside of the canvas. She thought about Crane. She thought about Magnus. She thought about Hannah lying on a cot in the basement for 3 winters, slowly forgetting her own name. She thought about Conrad's pocket watch with whatever was hidden under its lid, waiting in the second flour sack. She thought about her father. She thought about all of it at once. The way you think about all of it at once when you are 41 years old and lying alone in the dark, and the distance between the life you had and the life you have now is only 12 days wide. Then, somewhere in the middle of all that thinking, the first snowflake of the season landed silently on the tarp above her head. She did not see it fall. She only heard it, a single small sound, the faintest ticking against the canvas, a second flake, a third. Within an hour, the snow was coming down steadily, not heavily, not yet, but with the patient certainty of weather that had decided what season it was gonna be, and was simply beginning to deliver on that decision. Ingrid Brandt lay under the tarp in the dark. She listened to the snow. She listened to the willow framework holding its shape against the wind. She listened to her own heart, which was beating evenly in the body of a woman who was not yet finished. She whispered into the dark in German, the language she had not spoken aloud in 11 years. Conrad, I am still here. The snow kept falling. She closed her eyes. She slept. The clay. The snow stopped before sunrise, 2 inches on the ground, a thin sugar coating across the willow framework. Nothing yet that mattered, just a warning, just the season clearing its throat. Ingrid was up before the light. She had a fire going in a small ring of stones at the mouth of the alcove. She heated water in the tin cup. She drank it black, no coffee. Coffee was something she had given up the morning Magnus had counted her $7. She started on the clay. The clay deposit she had identified months earlier was a quarter-mile upstream. Heavy red-brown, sticky enough to hold its shape. She hauled it down in the 2 flour sacks repurposed now as carrying vessels. 3 trips before mid-morning. Her shoulders burned. Her lower back set into the deep low ache that meant her body was doing the work it was being asked to do. She mixed the clay with dried creek grass, with horse manure she had collected in a borrowed bucket from the stable on the East Road, with creek water in a proportion she adjusted by feel, until the mixture had the consistency she remembered from her father's hands. That specific give. That specific resistance. Then she packed it into the willow lattice, inside and out, and her hands turned red-brown, her forearms, her wrists. The clay dried and cracked on her skin. She had to rinse it in the creek before the cracks got deep enough to bleed. The water was so cold it stopped feeling like water. It felt like teeth. She kept working. Days passed. She lost count of them the way a person loses count of days, when the days are all the same shape. Get up. Eat what there is. Mix clay. Pack it into the lattice. Cut bark from the ponderosa ridge. Climb down with arms full. Layer the bark over the curved roof. Pin each piece in place with bent willow shoots passed through small holes she made with her father's folding knife. The cracked handle of that knife. The cracked handle she had felt under her father's grip when she was 9 years old. Now under her own grip, at 41. The same wood. 2 centuries. One family. She did not let herself think about that for too long. If she thought about it for too long, her hands shook, and shaking hands could not weave. The blanket Hannah Pruitt came in the evenings, 3 times that week. She brought food. She brought on the 3rd visit an old wool blanket she had been saving in a trunk for 15 years. It belonged to my husband. I am not going to use it. Take it. Hannah, take it. Ingrid took it. Hannah sat on the flat rock and watched her work. They did not talk much. They did not need to. The kind of friendship that had begun the first night under a tarp had moved past the stage of words. It had moved into the stage of 2 women in the same canyon at the same hour, sharing the same darkness without having to fill it. The Apprentice. On the 7th day after the snow, a man Ingrid did not know walked up the creek path and stopped at the edge of the work area. He was big, heavily built, 40 maybe, with the deliberate slow movement of a man whose strength was real and who therefore did not need to perform it. He watched her for a long minute. Then he said, "Mrs. Brandt." "Yes. Bishop sent me." She put down the clay. "Thomas Bishop." "Yes, ma'am. He said to tell you that you should have help with the upper bark courses on the windward side. He said 1 slip on a green pole ladder and the whole season ends in November." "Did Mr. Bishop send you with payment?" "He sent me with a day. He said a day was what you needed. He said you would not take money. So he sent the day." She looked at him. "What is your name?" "Davis." Cornelius Davis. I came west from Kentucky with the wrong idea about mining. Mr. Bishop took me on as an apprentice in October. How old are you, Mr. Davis? 23, ma'am. She thought about that. She thought about pride, about independence, about the difference between accepting help and accepting charity, about what her father would have said, about what Conrad would have said. Conrad would have said, "Take the help, Ingrid. Take it. Pride is for men who have never had to choose between pride and a roof." She nodded once. "All right, Mr. Davis. The ladder is over there. Hold it while I finish the windward run. After that, we will see what else there is." He nodded. He walked to the ladder. He did not say another word for the rest of the afternoon. He held the ladder. He passed up bark pieces in the order she asked for them. He moved with the quiet competence of a young man who had learned recently that he was good at construction in a way he had not previously suspected. When the light started to fail, he climbed down and looked up at the curved bark roof. It is not going to leak. No, it is not. Mr. Bishop said you could teach me a thing or two if I watched closely. What would you like to know? How you knew to use the curve? She wiped her hands on the rag at her waist. My father was a charcoal burner in a forest in southern Germany. The shelters my father built were not meant to last. They were meant to keep men dry and warm for one season. So he used what was already there: curved branches, earth, bark, whatever the forest had not yet decided to keep for itself. The shape of the dome was not invented by him. It was already in the wood. He just stopped resisting it. Davis listened. The land tells you what it wants. You have to be willing to hear what it tells you. Most builders are not. Most builders come with a plan and try to force the land to accept it. You can do that. People have been doing that for 1,000 years. But it costs more. It always costs more. He nodded slowly. I will remember that, Mrs. Brandt. He left. She did not know it then, but Cornelius Davis would still be quoting that exact sentence to apprentices of his own when he was 64 years old and running the largest building operation in 3 counties. The storm. The next storm came on the 2nd of October. Jasper Holloway had stopped at her side in the afternoon. He had pulled his wagon up. He had not gotten down. Weather's changing tonight. She had looked west. The clouds had the particular yellow-gray color that preceded sustained cold rain, rather than the clean blue-white that preceded snow. How long? Day and a half, maybe 2. Wind's coming with it. The wagon had moved on. She had checked the burlap door's fit one more time, adjusting the willow pin to hang it tighter. She had checked the placement of the uppermost bark courses on the windward side. She had walked the perimeter of the structure looking at the transitions: wall to hillside, roof to wall, ground to bottom course of clay. Every junction was either sealed or designed to drain. She had gone to her tarp shelter, the one she was still sleeping under, 20 feet east of the woodshed. She had crawled in. She had lain on her back, with her coat pulled over her, and she had listened to the creek. In the darkness, the cold pressed against the tarp, with the patient insistence of something that did not have to hurry. Around midnight, the first drops of rain hit the tarp, tentative, spacing themselves out. the way the first drops always do, as though testing the surface before committing to the full weight of what was behind them. By morning, the full weight had arrived. The rain came in waves, each wave colder than the last, driven by a northwest wind that had picked up steadily through the night. By first light, the wind was sustaining at 30 miles an hour. The temperature at dawn was 34 degrees. The creek had risen 18 inches overnight. It was carrying debris, branches, a section of fence post from somewhere upstream. Ingrid stood at the creek bank for a moment and watched the brown water move. Then she turned. She looked at the woodshed. Water was running down the hillside above the alcove in a continuous sheet, finding every natural channel, creating temporary ones where the grass had died back. She watched where the sheet water went when it reached the level of the woodshed's roof. It hit the curve of the bark shingles on the upper windward edge. It redirected. The geometry of the dome had no flat sections to accumulate, no horizontal ridgelines to pull along. The water broke into smaller flows at the point of contact and followed the curve to the sides, channeling away from the structure in two clean streams, running alongside the alcove walls, disappearing into the gravel at the base of the slope. Not a seam, not a junction, not a single transition in the roofline caught or held water. It all moved. She walked around to the leeward side. She checked the wall there, dry. The clay had darkened on the windward face where water had run across it, but the surface was sealed. No cracking visible, no soft spots where the matrix had failed. She stood in the rain. The wind drove water sideways under her hat brim, into her eyes, down her collar. She did not move for nearly a minute. She had built this with $7 and 46 days, and her father's voice in her head. And it was working. The Lindstroms. The Lindstrom family arrived in the third week of October. Ingrid was not at the shed when they came into Helena. She heard about them the next afternoon from Holloway, who had been at the train depot when they came off the eastbound car. He stopped his wagon at the creek path. He did not get down. Family came in yesterday. Yes. Man, woman, 3 children. Woman is about 7 months along. Ingrid waited. Man is sick. She knew without asking what kind of sick. She had heard that cough in Conrad's chest for the last 4 months of his life. She had recognized it by its texture, the dry depth of it, the way it came from a level below where ordinary illness lived. Where did they go? The church. She closed her eyes. She opened them. Thank you, Jasper. He nodded. The wagon moved on. She walked into Helena that evening. The church basement smelled of cold stone and old ash. A single lamp hung from a hook near the entry and threw more shadow than light. The 3 children were arranged on the floor in the corner farthest from the door, sharing 2 thin blankets. The oldest sat upright. The youngest leaned against her in the configuration of children who had learned to conserve warmth through proximity. A man lay on a plank bed along the right wall. His eyes were closed. His breathing was audible from the doorway. Not labored exactly. Conscious. The breath of a body that was working at something. A woman sat on the floor beside the plank, her back against the wall, her hands folded over the full roundness of her belly. She was simply sitting, in the way of someone who had exhausted the available actions and was now in the inventory phase, taking stock of what remained. She was 34. Her eyes, when she looked up at the sound of Ingrid's entrance, were clear and direct, and not particularly hopeful. "My name is Ingrid Brandt. Annika Lindstrom. How much firewood do you have?" "Maybe 2 weeks, if we are very careful. Eric has not been able to cut for 6 weeks. There is no money to buy more. You need 4 cords minimum to make it to April." "I know. I do not know who would sell to us on any terms we could meet." The 3 children in the corner had gone quiet in the way of children who had learned that adult conversations about resources required stillness. Ingrid looked at them for a moment. "I need workers. I am building 2 additional storage structures before spring. One for root vegetables, one for tools. I am paying in firewood instead of cash, because cash is what I do not have either. A day stacking work from your children buys a week's worth of splits. They stack. I cut. Does that seem reasonable?" Annika looked at her. The woman's face did not change, but something behind the woman's face did. She knew what was happening. The accounting was transparent. A 7-year-old's stacking capacity for a day was worth perhaps 2 hours of adult labor, not a week of split pine. The discrepancy between the offered exchange rate and the actual exchange rate was the gift. Both women understood this simultaneously. Neither of them commented on it. Annika said, "More than I have a right to expect from anyone." "You have every right to expect help when you need it. The only question is whether it arrives." Ingrid started toward the door. "Mrs. Brandt." She turned. "I will send the children tomorrow, at first light." The children. The children came at first light exactly as Annika had promised. The oldest came alone first. She arrived with the formality of a child who had been taught manners as a form of armor. "Mrs. Brandt, my name is Lena. I am 7 years old. My mother said I should ask you what you want me to do." Ingrid showed her the stack. She explained the system. Large pieces first, flat face down, tight enough that nothing wobbled, but not so tight that air could not move between them. Second layer perpendicular to the first. Third layer parallel. She demonstrated with 3 pieces. She handed the 4th piece to Lena. The child placed the piece, looked at it critically, adjusted it a 1/4 inch, checked it against the adjacent piece, adjusted again. "The air gap needs to be consistent," Lena said, to herself more than to Ingrid. "Otherwise, some pieces dry faster than others, and the stack is not uniform." Ingrid looked at her. "Where did you learn that, from what you just said?" A pause. "Is it right?" "Yes, it is right." Lana went back to stacking. Peter arrived an hour later. With Mira on his back in a sling their mother had fashioned from a shawl. He set Mira down on a flat rock in a sheltered spot, with a piece of pine bark to examine. He joined his sister at the stack. Peter was 6. He moved differently than Lana. Where she moved methodically, he moved quickly, and then stopped to assess. Adjustments in batches rather than piece by piece. Mira watched everything from her rock with the wide attention of a 4-year-old who was filing information she did not yet have categories for. Ingrid cut. The children stacked. By the end of the 3rd day, the Lindstrom woodpile had grown by half a cord. and the children had absorbed 3 weeks of stacking technique. The name's Annika came on the 4th evening. She walked up the creek path slowly, her hand on her belly. She moved with the deliberate care of a woman who was carrying 7 months of pregnancy through grief simultaneously. She came alone. The children were back at the basement with Eric. She brought a small jar of something. She set it on the flat rock. It is cloudberry preserve from Wisconsin. It is the last jar. I would like you to have it. Annika. Please, Mrs. Brandt. Ingrid stopped. She took the jar. Sit. They sat on the flat rock together. The fire crackled in the stone ring. The temperature was 12 degrees. The breath came out of both of them in long, pale plumes. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Annika said, Mrs. Brandt, may I tell you something? Yes. I have not told this to anyone in this town, not even the Reverend. I do not know why I want to tell you, but I do. Tell me. Annika folded her hands over her belly. She looked into the fire. In Wisconsin, before this child, we had another. A girl. Her name was Inger, after my mother. She was 3 years old. She had a fever in the spring of last year. The doctor in our town came late. He had been at the saloon. He had been drinking. I knew when I opened the door that he had been drinking. I let him in anyway, because there was no one else. A pause. He gave her something. I do not know what. He said it would bring her fever down. By morning, she was gone. Ingrid did not move. Eric did not blame me. He blamed the doctor. He went to the doctor's house with a piece of timber in his hands. He did not use it, but he carried it there. And the doctor saw it. And the doctor left town 2 weeks later. And nothing happened in any court ever to anyone. The fire popped. After Inger, I could not stay in Wisconsin. I could not look at our cabin. I could not look at her grave. I could not look at the road the doctor's house had been on. We sold what we had. We came west. We came here. And then Eric began to cough. 2 months ago. Annika finally looked at Ingrid. This child I am carrying, he does not feel like a child. He feels like a prayer I am holding in my body. And I do not know yet whether the prayer will be answered. And I am very tired, Mrs. Brandt. Ingrid did not say anything for a long moment. The fire moved in the stone ring. Then she said, Annika, I had 2 children before Conrad. They were not Conrad's. They were from before. Annika's eyes lifted. My first marriage, when I was 19, in Bowdoin. He was a soldier. He died in 1857. The children, both girls, died in the cholera that came through that summer. Marta was 4. Ilse was 18 months. Mrs. Brandt, I have not said their names out loud in 23 years. Annika reached across the rock. She took Ingrid's hand. Ingrid's hand was raw, cracked, stained with clay. Annika's hand was warm. The 2 women sat in the firelight, their hands together on the cold, flat rock. Neither of them crying, neither of them speaking, just holding on. The fire kept burning. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. Above them on the hillside, the woodshed sat against the rock face in the dark, holding its curve, holding its dryness, holding everything Ingrid had built into it. After a long time, Annika said, "Marta, Ilse." Ingrid closed her eyes. "Marta, Ilse," Annika said again. Quietly, clearly. The way you say a name when you are giving it back to a person who has not been allowed to keep it. Ingrid did not open her eyes. She just nodded. Once. The sound of Annika's voice had carried two children's names across 41 degrees of latitude and 18 years of silence, and had set them down gently on a cold rock in Montana where they could be heard. The Builder's Book. Ingrid did not visit the basement that week. She cut wood instead, 12 hours a day. The children stacked. The pile grew. In the second week of November, Eric Lindstrom asked to see her. Annika came up the creek path alone, bundled against the cold. She found Ingrid splitting in the upper drawer. "He is awake. He is asking for you. He says it cannot wait." Ingrid put the maul down. She walked back with Annika. The basement was warmer than it had been the first time she entered it. The children had been organizing the wood stack in the corner with the technique they had learned at the creek. The fire in the small stove was burning clean and yellow. No smoke. No smell of damp combustion. Eric was sitting partially upright against the wall. His eyes were sunk. His skin was the color of old paper. But his eyes, when they found Ingrid, were sharp. "Mrs. Brandt, Mr. Lindstrom, please, sit." She sat on the edge of the plank. He gathered himself for a moment, breathing carefully, spending each breath the way a poor man spends coin. "My wife told me you are German, from the Black Forest." "Yes. My grandfather was a builder in Hamburg. He came to America in 1828. He taught my father taught me. I built barns, houses, a mill near Eau Claire. I was good at it. Annika told me." He smiled faintly. "She is too kind about my work. I doubt that Mr. Lindstrom." He coughed. He did not cough hard. The body did not have anything left to cough hard with. "Mrs. Brandt, I watched my children come home from your woodshed every evening for 6 weeks. I asked Lena what you were doing. I asked her how you were doing it. She told me. I did not believe her at first." He paused. "Wattle and daub is older than Christendom. The technique is older than this country, older than every country. But what my daughter described to me, you are not just using the technique. You are using it the way the Romans used vault construction. You have made a barrel vault out of green willow. You have integrated it with stone thermal mass." His voice was quiet. "That is not a woodshed, Mrs. Brandt. That is engineering." Ingrid did not say anything. "I was a builder for 20 years. I have read books on construction in 3 languages. I have never seen anyone in this country combine those principles in that exact way. Not on this scale. Not with $7. He reached with a hand that was not strong anymore to a small leather book on the shelf above his plank. He could not quite reach it. Annika reached over him and brought it down. She placed it in his hand. Eric held it for a moment. Then he held it out to Ingrid. This is my book. 30 years of drawings, of notes, of every building I ever helped build. There are sketches in here from my grandfather, from my father, from me. There are calculations for load distribution. There are mixing ratios for lime. There is everything I know. I will not be using it anymore. Ingrid did not take the book. Mr. Lindstrom, Mrs. Brandt, take it. I cannot. You can, because here is what I need to ask you. He looked at her steadily. Lina has my eye. She does not know it yet. She is 7 years old. She thinks about air gaps in stacked wood the way I thought about beam spans when I was 19. If I do not pass this on to her, no one will. Annika cannot teach her this. Annika is brilliant, but she is not a builder. You are. He pressed the book toward her. Teach her what I would have taught her. When she is old enough. When she is ready. Use my notes. Use yours. Make her a builder, Mrs. Brandt. Make her into what this country will not let me finish making her. Ingrid took the book. It was heavier than she expected. She held it on her knees. I will teach her. I will teach her everything I know, and everything you knew. Eric closed his eyes. He nodded once. He said, "Thank you, Mrs. Brandt." 2 days later, Eric Lindstrom did not yet die. The cough still held him, but the worst of his strength was now spent. He could no longer reach a book on a shelf without help. The brother in the 3rd week of November, on a morning when the temperature had broken 0 and was holding at 4 degrees below. Ingrid heard footsteps on the path, not the careful footsteps of Hannah Pruitt. Heavier footsteps, boots she half recognized. She turned. Magnus stood at the edge of the work area. He was not wearing his hat. His coat was open. His face was the color of wet ash. There was snow on his shoulders and in his hair, and he had clearly walked the entire 2 miles from town, because there was no horse with him and no wagon behind him. Ingrid set down the maul. She did not say anything. He looked at the woodshed. He looked at her. Ingrid. She waited. He did not finish the sentence. He could not finish it. He stood in the snow with his hands at his sides and his mouth open, and nothing coming out of it. Ingrid said, "Why are you here, Magnus?" He breathed in. "Greta is sick." "How sick?" "Pneumonia. The doctor came yesterday. He says he doesn't know. And the cabin. The roof is leaking. The chimney smokes. The wood I cut in September is wet through. Everything I built. Everything I..." He stopped. He looked down at his boots. "Everything I took from you is failing." Ingrid was very still. "Magnus, I know. Did you walk all this way to tell me your wife is dying?" "I walked all this way because I made a promise to my brother. And I broke it. And I have been breaking it every day since September. And I cannot live with myself anymore." She did not move. He kept going. The words came out of him now in the way water comes out of a clay jug that is finally cracked. "Conrad, the night before he died, he was lucid for an hour. The last hour he was lucid. He took my hand. He took my hand, Ingrid. He said, "Magnus, promise me you will take care of her. Promise me she will not be alone. Promise me you will be a brother to her the way I have been a husband." A long pause. And I promised him. And then I drove you out with $7 because I was afraid, because I thought, he shook his head, because I thought you were stronger than me. And I did not want you living in my house, reminding me every day that my brother had married a better person than I would ever be. The snow kept falling, light, quiet, the kind of snow that does not announce itself. Ingrid looked at her brother-in-law for a long moment. She thought about Hannah Pruitt, about 3 winters in a basement. She thought about Annika Lindstrom, about a doctor with whiskey on his breath, about a daughter named Inger. She thought about Conrad's hand on Magnus's hand, asking for one thing, the simplest thing, and Magnus saying yes, and then Magnus not doing it. She felt for one bright instant every cold inch of the path she had walked since September 17th. She felt the $7. She felt the maul against her shoulder. She felt the rain on the morning of October 2nd sliding off the curve she had built. She felt Conrad's pocket watch in the second flour sack, with whatever was hidden under its lid. She felt all of it, and she did not say, "I forgive you," because she did not. Not yet. Forgiveness was a thing she would have to build the way she had built the woodshed, slowly, layer by layer, over a long time, with materials she did not yet have. What she said instead was, "Wait here." She walked into the woodshed. She came back out with an armload of split pine, 8 pieces, the driest, cleanest pieces from the deepest part of the stack. She held them out to him. "Take these." He looked at her. He did not understand. "Take them. Get them home. Get a fire going for Greta tonight. Tomorrow come back. Bring an axe. There is a stand of dead pine in the upper draw. I will show you which trees. You will cut. You will dry. You will rebuild your stack the way I have rebuilt mine. And when you are done, you will go home and you will sit with your wife and you will tell her every honest thing you have ever been afraid to tell her. And you will live with her the rest of the time, however long that is, because the time is shorter than you think. I know this, Magnus. I know this better than you do." His hands shook as he took the wood. "Ingrid, go home. I cannot pay you for this. I am not asking you to pay me. I am asking you to stop being a coward." He nodded. He could not speak. She said, "And Magnus, yes, this is not forgiveness. Do not mistake this for forgiveness. This is firewood. Forgiveness, if it comes, will come later. And it will not come because of words. It will come because of what you do every single day, from this day forward. Do you understand me?" "I understand." "Then go." He went. He walked back down the creek path with his arms full of pine, the snow falling on his shoulders, his head bent. Ingrid watched him until he was out of sight. Then she turned and walked back to the mole. She picked it up. She kept cutting. The waiting. That night, the temperature dropped to 11 below zero. The fire in her stone ring burned down to coals. She sat beside it, wrapped in the wool blanket Hannah had given her, the other blanket folded across her lap, her hands cupped around a tin of warmed water. She thought about Eric Lindstrom's leather book, sitting now beside her bedroll. She thought about Magnus walking home with 8 pieces of pine. She thought about Conrad. She reached into the second flour sack. She brought out the pocket watch. She held it in both hands. She did not open it, but for the first time in 8 weeks, she sat with it on her lap, in the firelight, with her thumb resting on the lid. She whispered, "Soon." She did not know who she was talking to. She put the watch back. She slept. The dugout. The cold deepened through December. Each morning, the creek ice thickened from the edges toward the center. Each evening, the temperature dropped a degree lower than the evening before. The high country went white. The tree line followed the white down the slope day by day. Ingrid moved into the dugout in the first week of December. She had finished it in the last days of November. 4 feet by 8 feet. Standing height of 5.5 feet at the center ridge, roofed with pine poles covered in bark and sod. The 3-legged stove she had bought from Eccles, seated on 3 flat stones of matched height, because the stove was missing 1 leg. The interior, with a fire running for 3 hours in the morning, came up to 65 degrees and held there for most of the day. A small fire in the evening kept it through the night. The dry pine from her woodshed produced no smoke, no buildup, no slow chemical danger. She slept better in that hole in the earth than she had slept in the cabin she had shared with Conrad for 11 years. She did not know what to make of that. She decided not to make anything of it. The axe. Magnus came back on a morning when the temperature was 9 below. He brought an axe. He did not say anything when he arrived. He simply walked up the creek path. He stopped 20 feet from the dugout entrance. He waited. Ingrid came out. The upper draw. All right. The stand of dead pine on the southwest face. Do not touch the live trees. There are 6 dead ones I have been saving for a hard week. You can have 3. I will only take 2. Take 3. You have a wife to keep alive. He nodded. They walked up together. She showed him the trees. She showed him how to read the lean, how to set the notch, how to feel the moment when the trunk decided which way it wanted to fall, and how to step away from the wrong side 3 full seconds before he would have thought to. He listened. He had been a builder once. He had never been a particularly good one. But he listened the way a man listens when he has finally understood that listening is the thing he should have been doing for 46 years. He cut 3 trees. He limbed them. He sectioned the trunks into rounds. He carried the rounds down to her splitting block in 3 trips. He split them with her maul while she watched until she was satisfied that he was doing it correctly. When he was finished, he wiped his hands on his coat. Greta is breathing easier this morning. Good. The doctor says she may yet recover. Good. Ingrid. Yes. Thank you. She looked at him. Magnus, listen to me. I am not the one to thank. The wood is wood. The maul is a maul. Thank Greta. Thank her every day that she is still breathing the air in your cabin, because the day comes when she is not. And on that day, the only thing that matters is whether you said it to her enough times while she could still hear you. Do you understand me? His mouth moved. I understand. Now go home. He went. 2 days later, he came back. He took the wood. He went home again. 3 days after that, Ingrid heard from Holloway that Greta Brandt had sat up in her bed for the first time in 2 weeks and asked for soup. Ingrid did not smile when she heard. She just nodded once, inside the dugout, alone. And then she went out to cut more wood. The 8th of January. Eric Lindstrom died on the 8th of January in the early hours before first light. Annika sat with him. She did not call for Ingrid. She did not call for the Reverend. She let her husband leave the world the way she felt he would have wanted to leave it. Quietly, with his wife's hand in his, with the children sleeping, with the small stove burning the dry pine that had been keeping the basement warm for 2.5 months. By first light, he was gone. Lena was the first child to wake. She sat up. She looked at her father. She looked at her mother. She did not cry. She got up. She walked to the stove. She added 2 pieces of pine in the careful, overlapping pattern Ingrid had taught her. She blew on the coals until they took. She closed the stove door. Then she walked back. She sat down beside her mother. She put her small hand on top of her mother's hand, the hand that was still holding her father's hand. Mama, Annika nodded. Once. I will go tell Mrs. Brandt after Peter and Mira wake up. Is that all right? Annika nodded again. Lena waited until her brother and sister were awake and had been told. Then she put on her coat. She walked the 2 miles to the creek by herself. The temperature was 11 degrees. She did not cry on the walk. She had decided, somewhere inside herself, that she would not cry until she was back beside her mother. She arrived at the dugout. She knocked once on the board door. Ingrid opened it. She saw the child's face. She did not need to ask. Come inside, Lena. Sit by the stove. Warm your hands. Mrs. Brandt. My father. I know my love. Come inside. Lena came inside. She sat by the stove. And only then, in the warm, dim space with the woodshed wood Ingrid had cut and Lena had stacked burning steady and clean, only then did she begin to cry. The Psalm. The Reverend Edmund Crane came to the basement that afternoon. He performed the rites with the care and precision he brought to all official functions. He read from the 34th Psalm. The Lord is close to the broken-hearted. His voice in the cold basement was steady and resonant. The children sat together against the wall. Peter and Mira pressed against Lena's sides. Ingrid stood near the door. Annika had asked her to come. The message had come through Lena that morning. She listened to Crane read. She watched his face. She saw in it something that was not visible in his public expressions, the complexity of a man performing a role he genuinely believed in, while simultaneously aware that the room he was performing it in existed in its current state because of actions he had spent months working against. The wood stack in the corner, still nearly 2 cords deep, visible from where he stood. The children, warm in their inadequate coats. but warm. He did not look at the wood stack directly, but he did not avoid it entirely either. His eyes moved past it twice, briefly, without settling. Ingrid did not feel vindicated. She felt tired and sound, and aware of the specific weight of a winter that had been carrying this outcome in it since the first morning she had heard the cough in Eric Lindstrom's chest. Vindication required an opponent. She had never had one. She had only ever had a problem, and a deadline, and a set of resources. And she had solved the problem inside the deadline with the resources available. And the solution had extended itself to include people it had not originally been designed to include, which was not heroism, which was geometry. If you build a structure sound enough, it can hold more than the minimum it was designed for. Eric Lindstrom had been 41 years old, the same age she had been on the morning Magnus counted her $7. The baby came on the 1st of February. Annika went into labor at 3 in the afternoon. The midwife from the east side of town had been notified 2 days earlier and was already at the basement when the contractions began. Ingrid arrived at 5. She did not leave. She sat with Lena, Peter, and Mira in the corner farthest from Annika. She read to them in a low voice from a small primer the church had provided. She read in English, her German accent gentling around the simple sentences. The cat sat on the mat. The dog ran in the lane. The children listened, their 3 pairs of eyes fixed on Ingrid's face. Mira leaned against Lena's shoulder. Peter held a piece of pine bark in his hand and turned it over and over, as though it were a small wooden compass that might tell him where to put his attention. Annika's labor was difficult, but not the kind of difficult that takes a mother. The kind of difficult that asks her for everything she has and accepts what she gives, and then gives back. At 6:47 in the evening, the baby came. She was a girl. She was small. She arrived with the full-volume announcement of a healthy set of lungs and the pink-faced outrage of someone who had strong opinions about the conditions into which she had been delivered. The midwife wrapped her in a clean cloth. She handed her to Annika. Annika looked down at her daughter for a long moment. She looked up at Ingrid across the dim room. Astrid, for the first name. A pause. Erika, for the middle. After her father. Ingrid did not speak. She had been called by her grandmother's name once. Astrid had been her grandmother's name. The grandmother who had taught her to weave baskets, who had died when Ingrid was 11, who had sat by the kitchen window in the Black Forest 50 years ago and 4,000 miles east of this Montana basement, and had taught a small German girl that the strength of a thing was in how it let go, not in how it held. Astrid. Erika. Annika held the baby out. "Will you hold her, Mrs. Brandt?" Ingrid stood up. She walked across the basement in the lamplight. She had not held a baby in 18 years, not since she had washed Ilse's small body and wrapped it in white linen and laid it in a coffin no bigger than a bread box in a churchyard outside Bowden on a hot June afternoon in 1858. She took Astrid Erika Lindstrom into her arms. The baby's weight settled against her. The baby's small face turned toward her chest, as though looking for something familiar. Ingrid's hands began to shake. She steadied them. She brought the baby in close. She bent her face down. She whispered in German, "Marta." Ilsa, look, look at her. Look at this one. She is going to live." She did not cry. She had not cried since the funeral. But something inside her chest opened, slowly, like a door that had been closed for 18 years and had finally found a hand willing to push it. She held the baby. Annika watched her hold the baby. Lena, Peter, and Mira watched from the corner. The Reverend Crane stood in the doorway. He had arrived at some point Ingrid had not noticed. He stood with his hat in his hands. He did not enter further. He did not speak. He just watched. And the look on his face was not the look of a man performing a role. It was the look of a man who had seen finally and unmistakably what kind of warmth could be built by people he had spent a winter doubting. Eleanor. The Reverend Edmund Crane came to find Ingrid alone in the 3rd week of February. He did not come to the dugout or to the basement. He walked the creek path until he found her. She was at the woodshed. She was working fresh clay into 2 small surface cracks. The freeze-thaw cycle had opened along the windward face, pressing the new compound in with her thumb, smoothing it flat, letting it cure in the cold air. He stopped at the standard distance. He watched her work for a while. He did not announce himself. She knew he was there. She kept working. When he finally spoke, his voice had a quality she had not heard in it before. "Mrs. Brandt, Reverend, I have been thinking about what I said to you in September. A great many things have happened since September. Yes." He paused. "I told you that this structure was inappropriate, that it would fail. I implied that the congregation's assistance represented the only reasonable path available to you." Another pause. "I was wrong on all counts." She turned. She set the trowel down. He met her eyes with the discomfort of a man who was doing the correct thing and finding that correct things are not necessarily comfortable things. She let the silence hold for a moment before she answered. "You were working with the information you had, and the assumptions that came with it. My assumptions were wrong." He said it plainly. "The Lindstrom family is alive. There is a new child in this town. Annika Lindstrom is making plans for her future. The church's role in any of that was to provide a cold room and tell them they could not stay past Christmas. Reverend, Mrs. Brandt, may I tell you something? Something I have not told to anyone in this town." She thought briefly of Hannah Pruitt, sitting on the edge of a tarp in October. She thought of Annika on a flat rock in November. She thought of Magnus in the snow holding 8 pieces of pine. This was the 3rd time in 5 months that someone had walked up to her with a thing they had not been able to say to anyone else. She did not know yet what it was about her that made people do this. She said, "Yes, Reverend, you may." He took a breath. "My wife's name was Eleanor." The words came out small, like he had been carrying them in his throat for 10 years, and had finally set them down on the snow. "We were in Ohio. I was the assistant minister at a congregation outside Cleveland. I went on a missionary circuit through southern Indiana in the autumn of 1866. I was gone for 6 weeks. I was supposed to be gone for 4. The roads were poor. I delayed my return." He looked at the woodshed, not at Ingrid. "Eleanor was alone in our small house. The first cold of the winter came early that year. There was a woodpile in the yard. I had cut it before I left, but it was on the north side of the house, and the rain came in October and froze, and the wood was iced over by the time the cold settled in. A silence. Eleanor did not know how to chop frozen wood. I had never taught her. I had told her more than once that chopping was a man's work, and that when I was away, she should ask the neighbor. The neighbor that autumn had gone to visit his daughter in Indianapolis. He was not home. Eleanor did not know where else to ask. Ingrid did not move. She tried. I saw when I came home the marks on the chopping block. She had tried. The axe was lying in the snow beside the back step. The wood pile was almost untouched. She had gotten one piece. One piece, Mrs. Brandt. Then I think she gave up. Or she could not lift the axe high enough. She was not a strong woman, Eleanor. She was a small woman. She had been a small woman all her life. His voice was flat now. The way a voice goes flat when the speaker is reading the worst story he knows aloud, and his only protection is to stop coloring the words. She died in our bed. The fire had gone out 3 days before I came home. I do not know exactly when she stopped breathing. The doctor said the cold did it. He said it was a quiet death. He said that in cases like Eleanor's, the body grows tired and slips. He meant it as a kindness. I think he meant it as a kindness. Ingrid still did not move. I have spent 10 years telling myself that I was God's instrument, that my work in Indiana had been important, that I was where I had been meant to be. But the truth, Mrs. Brandt, is that I was vain. I was vain about my preaching. I extended my circuit because I wanted the audience. I told my wife when I left that chopping was a man's work. And then I stayed away from her too long. And she died in the cold because I had not allowed her to be strong. He looked finally at Ingrid. And every time since you came to that creek in September that I have seen you swing a maul, or weave a willow, or refuse the help that I in my arrogance offered you every single one of those times that Mrs. Brandt, I have thought of Eleanor. And I have hated you for being able, for surviving, because you reminded me every day that my wife could have lived if I had taught her, or let her teach herself, or simply not stood in her way. Ingrid did not say anything for a very long moment. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. The creek made the small sounds it made under ice. Then she said, "Reverend Crane, yes, I am not going to forgive you for Eleanor. That is not mine to forgive. I know. What I will tell you is this. Go to her grave, wherever it is, Ohio, wherever you put her. Go and kneel down and tell her out loud what you just told me. Tell her that you understand now. Tell her that the next woman you meet in your congregation who tries to be strong, you will not stand in her way. Tell her that you will not stand in any woman's way again, for as long as you live." She paused. "And then live like you mean it." Crane stood in the snow. His face did not move. Then he nodded once. "I will." He turned. He walked back up the creek path. He did not look back. Ingrid stood for a long time at the woodshed after he was gone. Then she went back to the clay. She pressed the new compound into the second crack. She smoothed it flat. She let it cure. The letter. The first week of April, the snowmelt began. The creek broke up over 3 noisy days. The ice going out in chunks that accumulated downstream and then cleared. The water running brown and fast and cold, carrying the winter's accumulated weight toward the Missouri. The cottonwoods along the creek began to put out their first leaf buds, small, yellow-green, tentative in the way of things that have decided to try again after a long extension. The woodshed sat against the hillside, unaffected. The clay had cured to its final hardness over the winter. The willow frame had completed its seasoning and was now fixed in its curved position as permanently as if it had been grown that way. The firewood remaining inside almost 2 full cords was as dry as it had been in October. On the 7th of April, Ingrid sat in the dugout in the early afternoon. The board door opened to let the spring light in. The stove cool. The wool blanket Hannah had given her folded across her knees. Conrad's pocket watch was in her hand. She had been carrying it every day since the funeral. She had held it, pressed it to her cheek, held it under her pillow, heard it tick its uneven, unreliable tick through every cold night since September. She had never opened the lid. She was 41 years old. She was alive. She had built a thing that had held. She had held a baby in her arms. She had buried a friend. She had told a reverend to go kneel at his wife's grave. She had given pine wood to the brother-in-law who had stolen her home. She thought, sitting in the dugout, that maybe she had earned whatever was inside. She turned the watch over. Her thumb found the small catch on the lid. She pressed it. The lid sprang open. The watch face was the same plain white face she had looked at 1,000 times. The hands were stopped as they always stopped on whatever hour Conrad had last set them. She tilted the watch. A small folded square of paper fell out. It landed on the wool blanket. It had been folded 8 times. It was old. The folds had pressed deep grooves into the paper. The corners had begun to soften. Ingrid's hands began to shake. She was alone in the dugout. The door was open. The light came in across her lap and across the small folded square. She unfolded it, slowly, one fold at a time. Conrad's handwriting. She had not seen Conrad's handwriting since he had stopped being able to hold a pen. 3 weeks before he died. The handwriting on this paper was strong, firm. The handwriting of a man who had still been well when he wrote it. This was not a letter from his deathbed. This was a letter from before. It was dated 16th of August, 1875, a year and a month before his death. She read the first words, "My beloved Ingrid." She closed her eyes. She opened them again. She kept reading. "If you are reading this, then I am gone. I do not know when. The doctor in Helena says a year, maybe 2. He says he is not sure. I have not told you. I will not tell you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I would rather you have a husband, however long I have left, than a dying man you must nurse. I know this is a selfish choice. I am making it anyway. I am sorry." Ingrid read this paragraph 3 times. A year. he had known for a year and a month. He had laughed at her bad jokes. He had carried wood. He had argued with her about politics. He had eaten her bread. He had held her on cold nights. Every day of that year and a month he had known. She kept reading. Ingrid, there are things I must tell you. Practical things. I am writing them here where you will find them, because Magnus will inherit the cabin. The deed is in his name. There was nothing I could do about that. I tried. The lawyer said it was not possible. I am writing this so you will not be surprised. So you will not waste a single hour fighting Magnus over the cabin. Let him have it. The cabin is wood and nails. You are something else. Listen to me. Walk south along Prickly Pear Creek, about 1.25 miles past the lumber company's staging area. The canyon narrows. On the east side against the north-facing slope there is a rock slide alcove. It has been there longer than the town. I noticed it the first week I arrived in this territory in 1862 before I ever met you. I have walked past it 100 times since. I have never built anything in it. It has been waiting for someone who knew how. Your father knew how. You learned from him. I have heard you describe what he taught you in stories you have told me at our table for 11 years. I have listened. I have remembered. The rock face is nearly perfect for what you would build. I think you will see it the moment you stand at the mouth. Do not let anyone tell you it is impossible. Do not take any offer that requires you to be less than you are. Trust your hands. Trust your father. Trust the woman I have been married to for 11 of the best years of any life that anyone in our family has ever lived. I trust you more than I trust the sun rising. Live, my Ingrid. Live for the both of us. Conrad. Ingrid sat in the dugout. The paper trembled in her hand. The light came in across her lap. She read the letter again. She read it a third time. He had known. He had known for a year and a month. He had walked her in conversation in 1,000 small ways toward the canyon and the alcove and the technique she would need. She remembered now the strange evening in the spring of 1875 when he had said casually over their supper that he had heard her grandfather had been a wattle and daub builder. She had corrected him. She had said, "My father Conrad, not my grandfather." He had said, "Of course, forgive me. Tell me again how it works." The fiber and the clay. She had told him. He had listened. He had been making sure she remembered. He had been making sure that when she needed it, the technique would be right there, in her hands. And the alcove. He had walked her past that alcove 2 years ago. The afternoon she had stopped and looked and filed it in her head. He had asked her what she was looking at. She had said, "Nothing. A thought." He had said, "All right, my love." He had not pointed at it. He had not said, "Look there, Ingrid. Remember that place." He had let her find it. He had let her file it. Herself. So that when the day came, the alcove would be hers. Not his gift to her. Hers. Because he had loved her enough to know that a gift of that kind given in words would have made her smaller. And a discovery of that kind made in her own mind, with her own father's voice in her ear, would make her larger, would let her become when she needed to, the woman he had always known she was. Ingrid bent forward in the dugout. She bent until her forehead touched the wool blanket on her knees, the letter still in her hand, and she cried. For the first time since the funeral, she cried openly in the spring light, in a hole in the earth she had dug with her own hands. She cried for Conrad, who had loved her in a way she had not understood until this moment. She cried for the year and a month he had carried this alone. She cried for Marta and Ilsa, whose names had been spoken aloud finally in November. She cried for Eleanor Crane dying in a bed with an axe in the snow. She cried for Hannah Pruitt and 3 winters in a basement. She cried for Eric Lindstrom and his leather book. She cried for herself, 41 years old, alive, held by a love she had not even known had been making the road in front of her every step of the last year of her husband's life. When she lifted her head, the light was lower in the dugout. She wiped her face with the rag at her waist. She refolded the letter. She put it back in the watch. She closed the lid. The lid still did not close quite flat. There was still that small cushion, the paper inside it. She stood up. She walked outside. She walked to the woodshed. She put her palm flat against the back wall. She felt nothing move. She said, "Conrad, I am still here, and I am going to live. For both of us." The wind moved through the cottonwoods. It had no opinion, but it carried her words anyway, the way wind carries everything into the canyon and out of it toward whatever is listening, the work. In May, on the advice of a woman named Clara Hoskins, who had ridden 60 miles to learn from her, Ingrid began to charge for her work. She set her fees on a sliding scale based on what each family could pay. She set a floor. The floor was not high, but it was a floor. Below the floor she would not go. Because as Clara had said, sitting in the dugout with her hands wrapped around a tin cup, if you let them keep undervaluing this, you are teaching them that it should be undervalued. Ingrid taught 43 families over the course of 1877 and 1878. Each translation of her father's technique was a little different. A homestead family near Canyon Creek needed a freestanding version with no rock alcove available. A widow named Agnes Pratt, who reminded Ingrid uncomfortably of herself at 30, asked questions that went beyond storage into the architecture of an entire life. Agnes Pratt became, over the course of the next 2 years, what Ingrid would have called a colleague if the word had fit naturally. Agnes learned the technique. She applied it to her own situation. And then she began teaching her neighbors. The knowledge spread. It spread the way practical knowledge spreads, when many people are using and modifying it, accumulating variations, refining under different conditions, becoming more robust as more failure modes were discovered and addressed. The report, The Territorial Agent, Henry Caldwell, came in March of 1878 to document the technique for an official report. He took careful notes. He measured the woodshed. He drew a schematic. He promised, looking Ingrid in the eye in the spring sun outside the dugout, that her name would be on the report. In June of that year, the report was published. Ingrid's name was not on it. The structures had been developed, the report said, by certain industrious residents of the Helena community. Certain residents, plural, ungendered. She read the report at the general store, standing at the counter where the week's papers were laid out. She read it twice. She set it back on the counter. She bought a pound of dried beans. She walked home. She did not cry. She had cried enough that year. She had cried for Conrad. She had cried for her daughters. She had cried for Eleanor Crane, who would have been a real woman with real handwriting somewhere, and a real voice and real hands, if her husband had only let her be one. She had no more crying left in her for an unsigned report. She had, instead, work. The return. In 1903, on the morning she turned 68, Ingrid Brandt walked south along Prickly Pear Creek. She walked the path she had walked for the first time on the afternoon of September 17th, 1876. The creek was running low in the late summer way, clear over the gravel bed. The cottonwoods were beginning their turn, the yellow coming in at the leaf edges, the same yellow it had been the first time. The woodshed looked like the hillside had grown it. The bark roof had weathered to the color of the surrounding rock. The clay walls had acquired the patina of something old enough to be part of the landscape's permanent inventory. The board door that had replaced the burlap years ago had weathered to a gray that matched the overall structure so closely that it was easy to miss in passing. She opened the door. She stood in the threshold. 27 years. The interior smelled of dry wood and resin and the earth that surrounded it. The smell of materials that had been doing what they were supposed to do for a long time and were continuing to do it. She put her palm flat against the back wall. She felt nothing move. The book. That afternoon, Lena Lindstrom came to the dugout for tea. Lena was 34 years old now. She had taught at a normal school in Wisconsin for the last 12 years. She had married a carpenter named Ross. She had 2 children. She had come back to Helena for the summer because Annika Lindstrom, who lived now in a small white house on the north side of town, financially independent, teaching 3 children 4 mornings a week, was beginning to slow down, and Lena had wanted to be near her. Lena sat in the dugout. She drank tea. She set the cup down. "Mrs. Brandt, I want to do something." "What is that, Lena?" "My father's book, the one he gave you, the one you have been teaching me from since I was 9. There are now 35 years of notes in it. Mine, yours, his father's. I want to copy it. I want to make 6 copies. By hand. I want to send them to 6 places, so that if any one place loses it, the others survive." Ingrid looked at her. "How long will that take you?" "The summer." "And what places?" "The territorial office, the normal school in Wisconsin, a homestead association in Dakota that Mr. Holloway connected me with 2 years ago, Mr. Bishop's son, who runs his father's operation now, Agnes Pratt, and one for me." Ingrid was quiet. She thought briefly of a report that had been published in 1878, with certain industrious residents, plural, ungendered. She thought of Eleanor Crane, who had no leather book, no notes, no copies. She said, "Yes, Lena, let us do it, together." They worked through the summer. 6 leather-bound volumes, each one written out by Lena in her clear, precise teacher's hand. Ingrid sat across from her at the small table in the dugout. She read each draft. She made corrections. She added in the margins small annotations in her own careful script. Things her father had said. Things Eric had said. Things she had figured out herself in the long winters since 1876. The 6 volumes were finished on a morning in late August. Lana tied them with string. She labeled each one. She placed them in a wooden crate. She stood up. She looked at Ingrid. "Mrs. Brandt, thank you. Take them home, Lena. Take them home and send them out. And come back next summer and we will start the 2nd edition." Lena nodded. She took the crate. She walked to the door. Before she stepped through it, she turned. "Mrs. Brandt." "Yes. My mother. She wanted me to tell you. She still says it. Every winter when she lights the stove." "Says what?" "The wood is dry." Ingrid closed her eyes. She nodded once. "Tell your mother I love her. Tell her I have always loved her. Tell her Marta and Ilse love her too." Lena nodded. She walked out. The last light. That evening, as the light was failing, Ingrid walked one more time to the woodshed. She stood at the door. The wind moved softly through the cottonwoods. The first cool of autumn was in the air, the way it had been 27 years ago. The exact same season, the exact same hour. She put her palm flat against the back wall. She felt nothing move. She said very quietly, "Father, Conrad, Eleanor, Eric, I am still here. And the work has held." The wind kept moving. The creek kept running. The hillside kept doing what hillsides do. And one woman, 68 years old, alive against every reasonable forecast, stood in the threshold of the small curved building she had begun with $7 and a deadline, and her father's voice in her head, and watched the last light of her 68th birthday fall gold and slow across the wood. She had cut across the door. She had hung across the stone that had held her up every winter since the year she had decided to live. She turned. She walked home.